Good afternoon. I'm Garrett Bain, Executive Vice President of Revenue at Gencana Global. Supposed to be Steve Bevan today. He's probably on the program. Steve's our president and founder. He was unable to make the trip. He's back in the US working on some legislative efforts. So I will be working through his presentation on the economics portion of our business and CBD in general. I had to get spun up on his presentation, so I'll do my best. But just a little bit about Gencana to start. I mean, we're a vertically integrated producer of hemp and hemp-derived CBD products. So what does that mean, vertically integrated? So we do genetics, farming, processing, extraction, refinement, manufacturing, all the way to finished goods. You probably maybe heard some of the things about our founders. They have a long history, over 20 years experience working in hemp, and have assembled basically a world-class team that leads the nation in high CBD production. So the root of economics in this space, CBD economics, right? It really starts at the farm. So if you're thinking about macro, micro factors related to economics, you're going to look at how it impacts the local communities. So local impact, delivering economic impact in farming communities, right? So with Gencana, and I'll use us as a model because I'm very familiar with it, we have a certified farming network. And what that means is we work with family farmers that are sometimes 6, 7 generations on their land. So we work with family farmers, we give them the genetics, the plants, we give them the playbook on how to be successful, and then we oversee and give them support throughout the growing season. So this enables us to take farmers that were potentially looking for an alternative crop. Many times it's tobacco in the state of Kentucky where we farm with the majority of our land. So these folks are, 6, 7 generation tobacco farmers looking for an alternative crop because tobacco has been going, thankfully, tobacco has been going away. It's been less and less people are smoking. So there's an economic need to replace that crop with something that can be profitable, right? Put people back to work. And these farmers have turned to hemp in order to do that, right? So we give them stable genetics and plants that we know to be successful, and we give them some structure to follow so that they can maximize their yield and their benefit at the end of the season when we harvest. So in doing that, we feel it's really been a boon for the local communities. We feel it's a support mechanism. We're able to work in rural communities, rural agricultural communities in the state of Kentucky, and starting to move elsewhere, using hemp as an enabler, right? So you have not just the farmers, but their farming crews. You've got planting, weeding, harvesting, right? There's a lot of tangent services that go along with the agricultural process. Just in 2018, we paid out to our farmers multi-million-dollar farm payments. We grew around 1,000 acres last year, and that was a multi-million-dollar cash crop for these farmers. So economic leadership. For us, we're pretty much the biggest in the state of Kentucky. You can see here the growth. We have a chart here showing the growth of our jobs that we've created, right? So back in 2016, when I joined Gencana, we were just under 50 or so employees. That included our farm labor, if you can imagine. So Gencana proper, front office, accounting, marketing, sales, that was just around 20 people, with about 30 to 40 more in the farms, right? So folks that are planting, doing the harvest, all of those types of things. So that's grown significantly in the past couple of years. Just this year, in 2019, we just passed 300 Gencana employees. 300, proper. That does not include our farming network. We're working with just under 10,000 acres of farmland and just over 51 different farmers. So you can imagine the farm labor required to work 10,000 acres across various parts of the state. So this is the economic impact that we're talking about, putting people back to work and revitalizing an agricultural community. The average age of the farmer in Kentucky, I think, is over 60 years old at this point. So how do we bring young people back into agriculture, right? With something new, something exciting. And hemp has really provided a pathway for that to happen. You'll see here This is economic impact, investment, buildings. Right now we have over $100 million in genetics in the ground, in plants. So this year alone, we put around $80 million back in the community. You can see that by the graph there. So I talked a little bit about the Certified Farming Network and how we help the farmers, providing genetics, SOPs, good agricultural practices, and automating harvest activities. I don't know how many of you are familiar with agriculture in the hemp space, but it used to be a pretty laborious activity to do harvests. You'd get a bunch of people and go out in the field and start macheteing hemp plants down, right? And some of these stalks are pretty thick, so you got to take a few whacks at that. And if you can imagine trying to scale that effectively, it'd be quite a challenge. So now we're helping these farmers by bringing in custom automated combine harvesting equipment, things of that nature, way outside of my skill set and my understanding. But we have a farm team that's all over that stuff. So we help these folks by bringing in this technology, providing genetics, investing in these farmers by bringing these technologies and these plants so that they're able to farm their private land. So in order for farming to work, you need to have a market, somewhere to sell it, right? We've worked very closely with the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, other legislative bodies in the U.S. in order to drive through change, regulatory change, legislative change. It was just announced last week the USDA has put together a crop insurance program for 2020. That's very important. That's very meaningful for the market, because you cannot have a secure crop without farm insurance, right? How are you going to get a critical mass of farming if you don't have a program to insure that crop against loss, right? So these kind of things we don't necessarily think about on a day-to-day basis, but are very important to our industry in the CBD space. With a crop insurance program, you will get more farmers on board who just weren't willing to tolerate the risk of not having insurance. So I think it's great news that we will have an insurance program in place in the US next year, and hopefully it'll inspire other Europe, potentially, and other places to develop similar programs to help their farmers, right? Because it all starts with the agriculture. So the hemp market, having these measures in place creates a situation where you can replicate and create scale. Because as these big box retailers come online around the world, you're going to need to create scale and quality and consistency. And that starts at the very beginning with the farming. If everybody is doing things differently at the farm level, there's no regulation, no crop insurance, no guidelines, no SOPs. If that's happening, how do you create a very consistent product to put into the consumer marketplace? It's very tough to do. So it's important that we start at the foundation and build that and work forward towards the market, right? So that you have a consistent and quality product. And need for a reliable and sustainable supply. So when we go to the store and we pick up a product on the shelf, we expect it to be the same whether we buy that in April or in August, right? And I think in our industry, in the CBD industry, we've seen a lot of fluctuation and a lot of variation in product standards and quality over the years. And I think it's getting better, truly. I think there's a lot of brands committed to creating a consistent and quality supply. But again, this all drives back to where the source material, how it's grown, where it's grown, the SOPs, how it's harvested, how it's extracted, how it's processed and refined. And lastly, confidence and compliance. So being rest assured that your product comes from a compliant source. On the farming side, making sure that your product started life as hemp and not marijuana, right? If you're buying from the US, you want to know that it comes from a registered program in a state regulated program under the federal farm bill. And a lot of the material here, unfortunately, UK doesn't have a program for flower yet, but the US has been supporting a lot of the brands that are happening here in the UK and in greater EU. So making sure that the source can be traced back to where it was grown, how it was grown, right? trace back to the farm and to ensure that that farm is regulated under a state-sanctioned program. This just gives you a little infographic we like to use just to kind of show you what this looks like, right? This value chain. Different pieces of the value chain and how it relates to economics. So proprietary genetics research, propagation. We recently purchased a greenhouse facility to do our own propagation, right? Certified farming network, working with a family farmer. Extracted and refined in a food grade facility. We're currently building a brand new facility in Western Kentucky to service the acreage around there. I believe it'll service around 50,000 or process 50,000 acres when it's finally complete in 2020. Accredited manufacturing, so taking those extracts, those isolates, those oils, those soluble products, and creating finished goods in an accredited manufacturing environment, making sure it's BRC, CGMP, right? All those three-letter acronyms that we love to put on packaging. FDA inspected, things like that. And then lastly, third-party tested for safety and quality. I know of no other industry right now that is so focused on certificates of analysis and quality batch by batch, and that's a good thing, right? These labs are starting to get dialed in on cannabinoid testing. They're testing for heavy metals. They're testing for residual solvents, pesticides, all these things, right? And batch by batch, I think that's how this industry is going to earn accreditation, right? Credibility, excuse me. It is that rigorous testing standard at the end. Just a few of our offerings, bulk oil and isolate. We do drops, we do capsules, topical creams, and this kind of plays into the economic piece because all of these things start life as agriculture, right? That's the root of all of this. And then it moves through the value chain and finally it makes it to retail shelves. We're not a consumer brand ourselves, a customer-facing brand. We're a B2B brand, but we partner with brands in the US, in the EU, some here in the UK, to make sure that the products that do make it to the shelf and complete the value chain are quality and consistent. In the future, we feel we're just getting started. This industry is new, right? It may feel like we've been doing this a long time, but it's really just getting started. I think that the demand is there. We see that globally. Almost the cart is before the horse, so to speak, right? Everyone wants these products, but I think there's a long way to go with both regulatory, legislative, and even R&D. We need to learn more about these cannabinoids, and I think that we're hearing about research being funded. We certainly contribute product to a lot of those studies because we want to know what that data looks like. You know, farmers need to farm. In the US, something north of 100,000 acres reportedly in ground. Not sure there's enough processing for all of that, but we'll see how things shake out after the harvest over the next couple months. Shifting global attitudes, educational process, educating legislators, regulators, consumers on what these products are and what to look for, the right questions to ask to make sure that they're getting a quality product. So we feel that hemp is the intersection of farming, food, public health, medicine, hemp, and medical marijuana. We are not a marijuana company ourselves. We don't participate in anything other than hemp. But we feel that it is a true intersection because as you look at the FDA, other organizations around the world, right now they're trying to decide, is hemp a food, a supplement, a drug? And I think we're seeing that it can fit in almost all of these categories, right? You have some clinically, you have some drugs that have come out of clinical trial. I think that you certainly see applications in the supplement and in the food spaces. So we look forward to more regulation coming down from these organizations like the FDA to provide a pathway so that we can best leverage the economic impact of this product. Without that, the big retailers across the globe are not going to get in and play, right? They may test the waters, but for them to go all in, there needs to be some regulatory or regulation in place so that we have the framework and standards to create safe products to put on those shelves. And I think you'll see that coming here in the next several months. So it should be something we see open up the market. And once that market's open from a retail perspective, that will fill out the value chain all the way back to the farmers. The farmers are going to need to go to work. So just, again, touching on compliance, I mean, BRC, CGMP, U.S. Hemp Authority, FDA food grade inspections, Global Food Safety Initiative. And those are kind of the things that are going to be important to the retail consumer as those markets open. Here's a bunch of them that we make sure are part of our platform. So moving forward, Gencana is dedicated, committed to being good stewards of the hemp industry, essentially, doing things the right way. And I think that's going to benefit both the farmers and the consumer in the end, and connecting those two, right? We aren't a retail brand, but we make sure the retail brands we partner with have the highest quality and consistency and compliance in the space. We're a triple net bottom line company. If you're not familiar, economic, environmental, and social impact, right? We seek to work with rural communities to help lift them up, make sure that we're using regenerative agricultural practices when possible, and make sure that we're reinvesting profits into worthy causes. That's all I have today. Here to answer your questions if you have any.
Do you have any questions out there? Kind of quiet?
All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hang on, we have one.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm really familiar with Gencana, and I'm proud of all the work that you guys are doing in the industry. I wanted to ask about, there was a news article maybe about a year ago, and I asked your leadership team about this as well, that you guys are growing with the University of Kentucky a 0% THC strain. And I know last time I spoke to the guys at the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, they were like, yeah, it's still experimental and we're still doing research on it. So has there been any progress on that? Has that strain been stabilized? And when can we see it as far as being commercialized?
Sure. So for those who aren't familiar, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback here. For those who aren't familiar, we have a patent process ongoing with a 0.0% THC strain. So it comes out of the ground with the THC turned off. It's non-GMO, which I'm not a scientist, so I'm not sure how they've achieved this. But our genetics research team partnered with the University of Kentucky to create this genetic strain, which we've gone into ground with this season as a test crop to try and understand and stabilize the genetics for our climate and for our soil outdoors. Obviously, this is something that started indoors with the university. We've gone into ground with it. We're working to stabilize it. We believe that next year will be our first commercial crop. So what you can expect from that is something that farmers feel confident going into ground with. Right now, if you're unfamiliar with the Kentucky model, there's a lot of testing involved. The Kentucky Department of Agriculture needs to approve and test your crop when it's time to harvest, basically giving you the all clear to make sure that your THC levels are compliant. Now, large-scale farmers don't necessarily want to have to deal with all that, right? They don't want to have to deal with the risk that their crop would have to be destroyed if they had a mishap with a genetic that went hot, too much THC. So we feel this 0% genetic will help with large-scale agricultural applications, as well as a unique profile for potentially extracts that naturally don't have the THC. That's been a big push. So a broad spectrum, there's so many terms now for a broad spectrum plants, so to speak. So something that contains minors and doesn't have the THC. Great question. Thank you. So yeah, hopefully next year. Yeah.
One last question, anybody? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.